Hello and welcome to the Empowerment Approach training program, and this webinar is part 3B, and we're now looking at why some children struggle and how stress hormones and which lead to threat responses can lead to children really struggling within the classroom. So this whole section of part 3 is all about understanding the neuroscience behind challenging behaviour and what the neuroscience can tell us about challenging behaviour. Rather than seeing children as just naughty or difficult, we can start really seeing what lies behind and beneath their behaviour, so that we can really look at how to help them do better. So we first of all started looking at how some young people have their needs met really well, and even if they don't, they have some really strong skills called executive function skills, and that enables that young person to manage the stressors they're experiencing much better than other children. We then looked at why some children have poorer executive function skills or have higher needs, and we've already looked at first reason, which was about experiences and how they can shape the brain, and how some people have just had a lot more experience of developing those executive function skills as they've gone through their childhood. We then have just looked at adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress, and how that can lead to a child finding it very difficult to become calm, finding it not developing the skills to manage big feelings and manage emotions, not developing the neural circuitry for some of the really important executive function skills that help children to manage really well in a classroom, like flexible thinking and attention control and impulse control. And we're now going to be looking at stress hormones and threat responses before going on to looking at neurodiversity or neurodifference. So here we are looking at stress hormones and threat responses. So we've looked at these 3 different reasons why some young people can really find it hard in the classroom and have difficulties with their executive function skills: limited experiences, adverse childhood experiences, and toxic stress and neurodiversity. And we're still looking at these adverse childhood experiences and the impact of that on the brain and the body. So a child's previous experiences can really skew, as we looked at Bruce Perry's work in the previous webinar, can skew a child towards vulnerability. So if a child has had lots of negative or bad adverse experiences during their life, it can make them more vulnerable. So even the smallest additional stressful experience can really put them topple the balance, and that's why you'll find that some young people, even very tiny things that happen within a classroom, can lead them to have very, very intense reactions. Children who've had really positive experiences, where they've been well connected with other people, really unconditionally supported, had lots of positive experiences through their life, are much more resilient to some of the stresses that happen in the classroom. So when when someone tells them they don't like them or they can't join them in a particular activity, or when they feel they can't do what they're being asked to do, they manage that experience much more positively, because they've got more capacity and more resilience to be able to do that. So for those children, all of these positive experiences have helped them become more resilient to the stresses, the daily stresses that we experience in the classroom. We call this the balance of life, and it's a really good way to explain to children why they might have more intense responses to the same stressors in the classroom as someone else who has less intense responses. We know that some young people who have had these bad stressful experiences can feel threatened very, very easily. So, some authors believe that some people have something called faulty neuroception, where their perception of threat can be very intense and not very accurate. So they might perceive a threat where there is no threat. And that's certainly something I've experienced in working with young people. So stressful experiences can lead children to be left stress sensitive. Even a small extra stress can lead to a very big response. And that is all based on Dr. Bruce Perry's work on how the balance is pushed towards vulnerability rather than resilience. Here's a little video.
So let's now explore the difference it makes when a young person either has really positive experiences through their life, or whether they have adverse childhood experiences that we were learning about in the previous webinar. So let's imagine that these yellow objects are positive experiences that a young person has. They're experiences where they feel really connected to people in their life, where they feel engaged, where they feel capable, they feel that they're doing well. And these red experiences are toxic experiences. They're stressful experiences where the child doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel looked after, doesn't feel capable, doesn't feel in control of what's going on. So let's imagine we're going to take a child who when they were born, in fact antenatally, let's go before birth, antenatally, their parent really looked after themselves and looked after their body, ate a really good diet, didn't smoke, didn't take drugs, didn't drink. And so that's a positive start to that child's life before they're even born. But let's imagine that they had a really, that they were premature, really premature. That's an adverse childhood experience. And then had a very, very difficult birth. So that's another adverse childhood experience. They were in intensive care at the very beginning and did not have that same bonding with the parents. There's another adverse childhood experience. But once out of hospital, the parents had really good paternity and maternity. The parents were together and a happy, settled couple. And they lived in really good housing with good heating, in a nice house where clean, not too noisy, the neighbourhood, there wasn't friction going on. So a really positive area, a very calming environment in which to be brought into the world. And during that time, both parents spent a lot of time with that, what we call serve and return, really spending time communicating with their baby and looking after, noticing its needs and responding to needs. And making sure it felt that the baby felt really loved and really looked after. The baby was breastfed, another positive experience. And then as the baby was growing up into toddlerhood, there were some really good relationships with friends and family, in which lots of positive experiences where the baby and that toddler was being told that they were fantastic and loved. Lots of communications about how they had belonging in that world, how significant they were to the people around them, and how loved they were. Really positive communications, and then some enriching experiences, being taken out on different walks, seeing lots of different things, playing games. So lots of focus on developing those executive function skills where they're being given lots of support in focusing attention, in supporting their emotional regulation by being soothed. So again, lots more positive experiences as they're growing up. And then they go to nursery and they have a really good nursery experience with really caring adults who talk to them and give them great experiences, and again soothe them when their parents aren't there. So the separation is not an issue. And then again in school they have really good experiences again with great class teachers who help them to feel capable and engage them. You can see that over their life they are weighted towards really positive experiences and a positive attitude, and believing that the world is a positive place and the people around them are positive and they'll be soothed and kept safe. So the weight is towards that positive lens, and I call it a yellow lens, looking at the world with a yellow lens. And you can see that then when things do go wrong, so let's say that child then, let's say the parents separated, But during that period, they both gave their child lots of love and support and talked things through and gave them decision making and helped them to feel part of the process, where they had some control over what was going on in terms of when they visited the other parent and how often, etc., and helped to feel certain about that. So maybe having calendars which helped them to recognise how many sleeps it would be before they saw their other parent. Let's also say that they suffered some bereavement. Maybe a close family member or maybe even a parent passed away, and now that really, really significant adverse childhood experience. But you can see that because their life was already weighted towards resilience and positive experiences, it actually means that they've got more capacity for dealing with stressful experiences. So when young people have a really good positive experiences early on in life, it actually gives them the resilience and the capacity to manage those stressful experiences that happen, especially if they continue to be supported by those people around them. The work of Dr. Bruce Perry, he talks about whether a child's life is skewed towards this positive experience in which they develop really good resilience and have the capacity for dealing with stress, or whether they've experienced so much stress early on in life that there's no capacity left, and in fact they're left believing that the world is not a positive place, that the world is not a safe place, and they become highly sensitized. They start interpreting things more negatively. So even when someone is on their side, they can see neutral facial features as being like this. So they would reinterpret, they would interpret things that we see as neutral as being threatening. So they have high threat responses. They are sensitized towards a threat response. That means that even when little things happen, so let's say they'll say something like, someone gave me a look, someone gave me a terrible look, because they are on high alert all the time. And that can be a really negative side effect of adverse childhood experiences, that they can develop something called faulty neuroception, where their perception of threat within the environment is highly sensitized and not very accurate. And that can mean that they deregulate very, very easily. The children who've had those positive experiences, who are loved, who are supported, who believe the world is safe, they have very accurate threat responses. They have accurate interpretations of threats. So they are not highly sensitized. They don't deregulate for little things. They've got the ability to regulate and think things through. So when you're in the classroom and when you have a young person who seems to deregulate and go into fight or flight or flock really easily through little things, just think to yourself, this could be because the weighting of their life has been led them to be desensitized, or either desensitized or very overly sensitized. I'll come to desensitization later on. And it's led them to be much more vulnerable in life. And at that point, there is something that we need to do as educators and as adults and as parents, and that is we need to pull that young person closer to us and help them to feel safe and soothed, rather than push them away through timeouts and detentions and punitive approaches. Because if we use punitive approaches, we do the opposite of what they need. We actually make them even more sensitized. We actually make them believe the world is an even more dangerous and less a safe place than they already believe. So when we are trauma aware and attachment aware, we start responding to young people's deregulation in a very different way. I hope that helps you to understand some of the impact of adverse childhood experiences on how children respond later on in life.
So last explanation, where we start realizing that when a young person is exhibiting high levels of stress response, the The best thing we can do is to pull them closer. The worst thing we can do is push them away, because that will exacerbate the very difficulties that they've got. So when a child has many positive experiences and rare stressful ones, they've got the capacity to manage those stresses that come their way. They become more resilient. Another way in which we explain this to young people is, I mentioned it in that last webinar, is through coloured lenses, and helping the young person to consider what coloured lens are they looking at the world through. Are they looking at the world through a positive yellow lens, where they see the world as a safe place, and they can interpret danger accurately, and they can interpret threat accurately? Or do they have a more heightened sense of threat, where they don't see the world as such a safe place? Or do they have red coloured lens, where they really see the world as quite a dangerous place because they've experienced so many adverse experiences themselves? Here's a video to explain that in a bit more detail.
So here's one of our models, which I call stress chemicals, and it's to help explain how the stress hormones in our bodies, which are released in our bodies and brains, can make a difference to how we perceive experiences and to how we cope in life. And we've got a model where we talk about 3 different types of experiences and how they can create stress or positive chemicals in our bodies. So let's start with yellow chemicals. So the yellow chemicals are the sunny, positive chemicals that are released when we have great experiences. So let's think of things like dopamine. When we achieve something, we get a release of dopamine in our bodies, and that helps us to feel really, it's when we feel really capable. So if we pass an exam, or we achieve something like, I've just done the 5K, so I've just gone, yes, I can do it. So when we achieve something, we'll get a release of dopamine, yes. There's also serotonin when we feel important. Maybe we're given a new responsibility, or we're given a promotion, or a child is given a new someone says, you're brilliant, you are, or they feel really popular. Something happens where they feel really popular. Maybe they've become really great at football, and everyone's like, yeah, you're the captain of the new team, and that helps them to feel important. There's a release of serotonin within their system. Oxytocin when we feel connected to other people, and endorphins when we get that rush of energy and good feeling that you can get when you've done really heavy exercise, or you really laugh. So all of those feel good chemicals, which make us feel really positive in life, that give us a sunshiny, positive outlook on life. I'm going to call those the yellow chemicals, and they give us a yellow lens in life. They make us think, yeah, life is good. I'm capable. I'm connected. I'm engaged. I'm looked after. Yellow chemicals. We've got the yellow chemicals. In life, there's always some blue times, and the blue chemicals are those stress hormones that are released. Things like, you might have heard of cortisol or adrenaline, and they happen when stressful things happen, when we don't feel in control, when we don't feel supported, when we don't feel connected, when we feel concerned about the future or what's about to happen. And when we go on to high alert, cortisol is released into our system, and it's there for a very good reason. It puts us into mobilization, where we might fight, flight, or freeze, or flock. And you probably heard of those kinds of stress responses. So we have the blue chemicals, and they're very natural chemicals that are released to protect us. Unfortunately, some young people have that stress response. They have something called faulty neuroception, or a faulty threat response, which I talked about in the previous webinar, where they perceive threat where there's no threat, where they think people are not on their side, and they have a stress response even though that's not necessary. And when people have a stress response, cortisol is released into the body. And if that happens time and time again, let's imagine a child is scared because of domestic violence, or because they feel unsafe for any reason. Maybe they live in a household where there's poverty, or adults who are not there for them, or in school where they feel that the adults don't like them or are not on their side. They can have high levels of stress on a regular daily basis. And when that happens, we call it toxic stress. And toxic stress is really, really bad for the body. It stops the body from rejuvenating. It stops cells from rejuvenating. It stops the prefrontal cortex, those executive function skills, from developing well and from being activated. So it actually stops a child from being able to focus attention, regulate feelings, manage impulses, and process information really well. And it's therefore a terrible thing for learning, and it's a terrible thing for children feeling good. That when children are on high alert on a regular basis due to toxic stress, if you think about stressful experience, cortisol on a regular basis, mix them up together, and you get a life that seems very dark. Children who feel that they feel hopeless, they feel that they're rubbish, they can't do anything, that nothing's going to change. Life feels dark. What we've got to do is try and help them have many, many more positive experiences. We've got to help them feel connected, releases of oxytocin, feel capable, releases of dopamine, feel important, feel significant, releases of serotonin. And we know that when children have got lots of those positive experiences, when they feel already capable, when they feel adults are on their side, when they have those stressful experiences, life is green, it's not dark. And I think of green stress response as those stressful experiences which are, green stress helps you to fly. Green stress is where you think of something like an exam, or a gymnastics badge, or joining a new club, where it's anxious making and it's stressful at the beginning, but you know it's going to help you to get to a better place, to get a new qualification or a new certificate or a new interest, a new skill in life. And so green stress helps you to fly. So we've got to help young people when we know that they've been in toxic stress. We've got to help them to feel calm, and we've got to help them to have so many more yellow, sunny, positive experiences with those release of good chemicals, that they can start combating those dark experiences, that hopelessness. So using this model and explaining to children about the chemicals that happen in their own bodies and how that makes a difference to their own stress responses can be very, very powerful. Young people can start going, oh, okay, so that's why I suddenly go, poof, that's why I feel like I'm on high alert and I feel anxious. And help them to realize that there is hope, that they can start to feel calm, and they can start to redress the balance and start creating less toxic stress, more positiveness, so that when stressful times come about, it's still stressful experience that can help them to be resilient and do well in life.
So the useful thing about understanding about the brain is that it gives us all of the information we need in order to know what to do now to support children and help them do better. So the first step for me is always about helping children make sense of their own habits, their own neural habits, their own stress responses. That's always got to be the first step, because it's the child, if they're in control of understanding the why behind their behaviour, they will then be more intrinsically motivated to want it to be different. So we know from looking at stress chemicals that we can start helping the young person to plan more positive connected times. It might be that they start looking at developing better friendships inside and outside of school, starting new clubs so they get a better sense of feeling capable and achievement. So lots of things we can do to address the balance of adverse experiences. It also gives young people a language with which to talk about whether the stress that they're experiencing is bad stress, whether it's going to become red stress and they'll pop, And that means that they can get the help that they need much more in a much more timely manner. So all of these models help to give a language to us in school to talk about stress, to talk about experiences, and to talk about what differences we can make in order to help young people to feel better and do better. So it's worth reflecting on some young people in the classes that you teach, or the class that you teach, and to what extent a young person who exhibits and presents with challenging behaviour, to what extent do they appear to have a sunny, positive, calm, connected and engaged lens of the world? Do they see the world as a safe and good place, or are they on the defence? Do they feel threatened and on high alert? Do they recognise when stress is green and will help them to do better next time? The more you can teach children about this, the better, the more you can support them. So we've got these yellow positive lenses where the child is has a sense of freedom, has a sense of safety and calm connectedness. So they feel calm, they feel connected, they feel engaged in life. We'll know that because they'll be communicating calmly, positively and engaging. We looked at this in one of the first webinars, but I'll just go through it very quickly as well. These states are helpful for relationships. They're helpful for rest and repair, physical repair as well as emotional repair. They also help young people to sleep better, to be able to read better, to be able to become calm and meditate and focus more on one thing at a time. They help young people to have more positive interactions with other people. They support with learning and play. Then we can have blue stress, where a person has got this sense of threat. And we've already looked at these stress responses several times over the course so far. So find and flock, where they cling to an attachment figure or to a group of peers. Form, where they try to appease and placate and peacekeep, even if it's not going to be in their best interests. Flight, where they are wary and nervous and anxious and panic and fly from the difficult reality of their life. So that might be through physical running, or it might be through addiction, or through gaming addiction, substance addiction, where they're really just, or through addiction and compulsive behaviours, where they're just trying to avoid the reality of their difficult life. Or fight, where they can be intimidating, aggressive, or even just huffing and puffing. And then the trick is for us to help young people, and for us to start recognizing stress responses when they're tiny, and not waiting until they are have become so big that they're much more difficult to manage. So really looking out for those tiny stress responses and helping children be much more mindful and aware of their tiny stress responses so they can do something about it very quickly. A tiny flock response. So, and then we've got the red stress, which is when a young person immobilizes. When they sense a threat, the body can start freezing or collapsing. There's a numbing, a depressed energy. In that video on adverse childhood experiences, you'll notice I talked about afterwards about the fact that children could become highly sensitive, or they can be desensitized, where they actually don't feel very much. The work, I think it's Deborah McNamara, who talks about the fact that some young people can create emotional shields around them, where they stop feeling, because feeling would be too big, and they would just fall into a puddle. So they become quite numbed to emotions. So you might find some children who don't really show any empathy for other people. It's not that they're naughty or bad. It might be that they've just been emotionally numbed by adverse experiences, and a tiny freeze and response. So in all of this, the big message that goes right through our program is not to drop our expectations of children. We need to keep expectations high. We need to expect them to work hard at doing better, but we need to be curious, not furious, about why they are presenting with challenging behaviour, and to help them do better in the future. by helping them to feel better and develop those executive function skills to manage times when they don't feel so good. I look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.